I stepped into RCA Studio B in Nashville, and the tension hit me like a punch in the gut. It was March 15th, 1971, and I was about to record the biggest session of my life, over 40 songs in one go. The pressure was immense, and I could feel it in every fiber of my being. Felton Jarvis, my producer, was already there along with the band. James Burton was on guitar, Charlie Hodge on acoustic, and Norbert Putnam on bass. The rest of the crew was settling in, and the studio was buzzing with energy. But beneath the surface, there was a sense of unease. I had been feeling off lately, and the flu I picked up in Las Vegas still lingered. My mind was a jumble of thoughts, and my body was aching from the relentless schedule the Colonel had set for me. We started with a cover of Ewan McCall's The First Time Ever I Saw Your Face. I had high hopes for this one. It was a beautiful song, and I wanted to make it my own. But as I began to sing, I could feel the strain. The harmonies with Ginger Holiday were supposed to be perfect, but something was off. My voice wavered, and I knew it wasn't my best. We tried it again and again, but it just wasn't clicking. Felton and I both knew it, and the frustration was palpable. Next, we moved on to Amazing Grace. I had always loved this song, and I felt a deep connection to it. I arranged it myself, and the studio fell silent as I began to sing. The backing vocals from the Imperials and the Nashville edition were like a choir of angels, and for a moment I felt at peace. But even as I sang, I could feel the weight of expectations. This was supposed to be a religious album, and it had to be perfect. I poured every ounce of emotion into it, but the perfection I sought eluded me. Then came Early Morning Rain. Gordon Lightfoot's song was a favorite of mine, and I had high hopes for it. But as I started to sing, the lyrics felt heavy. The song was about love and loss, and it hit a nerve. I tried to channel my feelings, but the flu and the stress were taking their toll. The band played on, and I did my best, but I knew it wasn't my best. We recorded it, and Felton and I both knew it needed work. The night dragged on, and the clock seemed to move slower with each song. We tackled That's What You Get for Lovin' Me, and I could feel the frustration building. The band was amazing, but I was struggling. My voice was tired, and the long hours were wearing me down. I tried to push through, but the more I tried, the more I felt like I was falling short. I looked around the studio, and everyone was giving it their all. James Burton's guitar licks were spot on, and Charlie Hodge's acoustic added a layer of warmth. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The songs were good, but they weren't great. And for me, anything less than great just wasn't good enough. As the night turned to morning, I could feel the tension in the air. The Colonel's plans for the year were ambitious, and I was determined to make it work. But the more I tried, the more I realized that something was off. The flu, the stress, the relentless schedule, all of it was taking a toll on me. I could feel it in every note I sang, and it was starting to show. But I couldn't give up, not now, not when I was this close. So I pushed through, one song at a time, hoping that the magic would strike. Maybe the next song would be the one. Maybe I would find my voice again. But as the night wore on, I knew that the challenges ahead were only just beginning. I arrived at the studio that evening, my nose all stuffy and my eyes aching. But I was determined to make the most of it. I had a 3-album agenda, and I was ready to dive in. My enthusiasm came from an unexpected place, contemporary folk music. Over the years, I've been listening to a lot of folk stuff, especially the sweet harmonies of Peter, Paul, and Mary. They introduced me to songwriters like Bob Dylan and Gordon Lightfoot, and I've been harmonizing with Charlie and read on songs like Blowin' in the Wind and 500 Miles. That night, I wanted to try something new. I brought in a male-female quartet, the Nashville edition, to help with the sessions. We started with The First Time Ever I Saw Your Face, a song I'd heard from Evan McCall. I wanted to do it as a duet with Ginger Holiday, one of my regular backup singers, but it just didn't come together the way I wanted, so Felton Jarvis put it aside for later. Next, we tackled Amazing Grace, a song that had recently been a hit for Judy Collins. The rhythm section set a slow, steady beat, and Chip Young added some bluesy acoustic slide guitar. David Briggs played some fancy piano, and we all joined in. But after a couple of takes, Felton told us to tone down the bluesy stuff. The final version was more conservative, but it worked. We moved on to some Gordon Lightfoot songs, Early Morning Rain and For Lovin' Me, which were big in the folk scene. The rhythm was restrained, with Jerry Kerrigan's drums and Norbert Putnam's bass providing a simple, effective backdrop. James Burton and Chip Young started a friendly guitar duel, and Charlie McCoy took the solos on harmonica. The songs were true to their genre, but I was having trouble. My voice kept breaking, and I was sniffling all the time. "Give me a Kleenex or something," I kept saying, trying to keep my nose clear. After the evening sessions, I checked into a Nashville hospital for treatment of my eyes. I'd been having trouble with them for a while, and no one was surprised when I had to take a break. While I was in the hospital, Felton used the studio time to mix and overdub some tracks for the upcoming album. RCA had already planned Life and Only Believe as an Easter single, and the album coming out in June would use the rest of the 1970 tapes. The Colonel suggested adding a live version of Something from the Las Vegas shows, but Felton thought a studio take of Hey Jude from Memphis might be better. They ended up adding the Easter single to the album, bringing the total to 11 songs. It was a complete album, but maybe not the best one. A few days later, I was back in the studio. The place was decorated for an early Christmas, with a tree and wrapped boxes. I brought gold bracelets engraved Elvis 71 for everyone. We started with Miracle of the Rosary, a song by my old friend Lee Denson. It went well, and we finished it in 4 takes. Then we dove into some Christmas songs. Merry Christmas Baby was a highlight, and I really got into it. I told the band to just run through it a few times, and I'd come in when I was ready. It was a classic blues song, and I was in my element. I pushed everyone to bring out as much emotion as possible. The first take was over 6 minutes long, and it was a killer. It made me think we should have done a blues album instead of a Christmas one. We tried Silver Bells next, but it didn't go well. I asked Charlie Hodge to sing harmony with me, but there was a mix-up in the setup. It just didn't feel right, and I couldn't get into it. I can't get into it, I admitted. We better go back to what we had. Despite the challenges, it was a night of music, and I was grateful to be back in the studio, even if my voice wasn't at its best. We were making something special, and that's what mattered. The night before, Felton had 7 masters on tape, and we all hoped the next night would be smooth sailing for the Christmas album. But things don't always go as planned. The next day, Chris Arnold, an English songwriter, joined us in the control room. He said, "You just don't not turn up on an Elvis session when you're hired." Chris was part of a songwriting team and got a rare invite from Freddie, so he had a front row seat for the drama. Our drummer, Jerry Kerrigan, didn't show up. He had stayed up all night after the previous session and fell asleep with the kettle on, waking up to a house filled with smoke. Felton, Tom, and Harry from RCA were not sympathetic. They had already replaced Jerry with Kenneth Buttrey, a top player who had worked with Bob Dylan. At 7:30 p.m., Elvis arrived with his entourage, dressed in a black, wide-shouldered, V-necked, high-collared jacket trimmed with gold, like his stage outfits. He joked about the new drummer being too slim, but we all laughed it off. Chris was impressed by how good the band was, and how quickly they learned the new songs. Felton acted more like a mixer than a producer, and Elvis made the big decisions. When Felton suggested adding a sandpaper effect to a song, Elvis said, "He wants to do his fingernails. Do that on your own time, Felton. You can get a manicure tomorrow, hell." We all laughed, and the good-natured jokes kept coming. We worked on I'll Be Home on Christmas Day, originally titled It Happens Every Year, and pared it down from 8 to 6 verses. We got a great bluesy tone, but Felton's sandpaper idea was scrapped. After a few takes, Elvis wandered through the Lord's Prayer, and we let the tape run. Elvis's phrasing on the word heaven was amazing, but he had trouble with the high notes at the end. He joked, "Didn't think I could do it, did you?" And we all laughed again. Things were going well until Elvis lost interest. He started breaking into old favorites and said he hated Winter Wonderland, giving a lifeless performance. A call from Priscilla in Los Angeles added to the distraction. The power had gone out at home, and she was looking for a flashlight. Chris noticed the untapped energy in the room, and it only took one guitar lick from James Burton to get Elvis going on Bob Dylan's "Don't Think Twice, It's All Right." We jammed for 11 minutes, doing the same verses over and over, adding new licks and phrasings. The song wasn't meant to be so fast, but the feeling was there. After listening to the playback, Elvis had no interest in returning to the Christmas songs, so we recorded tracks for the remaining songs and overdubbed his vocals later. The next night, Elvis was ready to record "Help Me Make It Through the Night" by Chris Christopherson. The song wasn't supposed to be recorded because Felton's friend Bob Beckham didn't want to make a deal. But Elvis took charge, working out the arrangement with the players and the singers, including the Imperials and a trio of female singers. We did 16 takes, and the best ones were numbers 10, 11, and 16. We grafted the ending from take 16 onto take 11 to create the master. Elvis then gave his full attention to "Until It's Time for You to Go" by Buffy St. Marie. The atmosphere was relaxed, and between takes, Elvis threw in snippets of any song that came to mind, from "Johnny Be Good" to "Lady Madonna." Felton was always ready to work around Elvis's moods to get what he needed. One night, the Imperials were back, and Elvis was into his karate stuff. Terry Blackwood asked, "If a man drew a pistol on you, how would you get it out of his hand?" Elvis asked Red to hold a gun on him, and before anyone could react, Elvis disarmed Red, and the gun flew across the studio, sticking in the back of my guitar. It was a tense moment, but Elvis offered to replace the guitar. The evening ended with a beautiful version of "Lead Me, Guide Me," a new gospel song by Dorothy Akers. The next day, Elvis started with "Fools Rush In," an old swing-era number. We had two drummers now, but the arrangement lacked real swing. With the Imperials present, Elvis turned back to religious material, completing "He Touched Me" in 4 short takes. He then gave "I've Got Confidence," a rocking, almost sexy treatment, followed by a very sacred version of "An Evening Prayer." Elvis wanted to make an album that reflected both the traditional gospel music he grew up with and the newer trends in Christian music. He mixed his repertoire, just like he did on his pop albums. During the day, Elvis slept, but the band kept working. Felton had a rule against yawning in the studio, fearing it might bring down Elvis. We took breaks in the parking lot. One night, Elvis struggled with "Seeing is Believing," and he took a break in the outdoor lounge. Otherwise, he stayed focused, directing the band and discussing backing parts with the female singers. We completed "A Thing Called Love" with an elaborate vocal arrangement, featuring bass singer Armand Morales in a unison part with Elvis. After a meal break, the atmosphere changed. Elvis sat at the piano and performed an impassioned solo set, including "I'll Take You Home Again, Kathleen" and "I Will Be True," both favorites from his days in Germany. Later, Felton excitedly reported to the Colonel that these songs could be great with overdubs. Felton wanted to get back to contemporary material. "I'm Leaving" by Michael Jarrett and Sonny Charles offered Elvis the challenge he craved. He saw his confidence echoed by the Imperials and pianist David Briggs, who thought it was a hit. Hill and Range provided 2 other single candidates, but they lacked the elements essential to Presley's best music. While Elvis struggled to remember the melody to "It's Only Love," he threw in a verse from Bob Dylan's "I Shall Be Released," indicating that this song should have been the record. The last night was running out of steam and Elvis out of voice. He recorded "Love Me, Love the Life I Lead" with ill will, complaining about the demo and the beginning. Despite his frustration, he showed his sense of humor when a female backup singer asked if the girls were balanced. He joked, "You should never ask that, dear." The sessions were almost over, and we spent the rest of the night doing vocal overdubs for the Christmas record and giving Temple Riser a shot at the duet vocal for "The First Time Ever I Saw Your Face." By then, everyone needed a break, and new sessions were scheduled to complete the original agenda. The spring of 1971 was a tough time for me. I had to finish my religious album, but finding good material was a struggle. We started with "Put Your Hand in the Hand," a recent hit by the group Ocean. It didn't take long to record, but I wasn't feeling it much. I also tried to redo "Until It's Time for You to Go," but the new version wasn't much different from the old one. The night ended on a high note with "Reach Out to Jesus," which showed that I could still deliver a powerful gospel performance. The next night, things didn't go as smoothly. I was late and not in the best mood. I tried to cover There Is No God But God, originally by Bill Kenny of the Ink Spots, but it felt like a throwaway. The band and I were rushing through the arrangements, and it wasn't our best work. We fell back on old gospel songs like Bosom of Abraham and I, John, which were easier to perform. The band's role was minimal, and it was all about the harmonies. By the end of the night, I was tired and just trying to fix The First Time Ever I Saw Your Face to make it a solo vocal. The third night, I had more energy. I wanted to give I'll Be Home on Christmas Day a more solid beat and then tackle My Way, which Frank Sinatra had made famous. The band did a great job with the arrangement, but I was tired and not fully into it. After multiple takes, I was frustrated and threw my headphones to the floor, storming out. Felton Jarvis, my producer, had to shut everything down. He knew I could be moody, but this was new territory. In June, RCA released Love Letters From Elvis, and it was a flop. Critics called it a bunch of leftovers, and it didn't sell well. The single Life did even worse, peaking at number 53. RCA tried to salvage things by releasing I'm Leavin', but it only reached number 36. The album and single from the May sessions didn't do much better. RCA kept releasing more albums, but the quality was slipping and so were the sales. Despite the poor sales, my live shows were still popular. I broke attendance records at the Sahara Tahoe and in Vegas, but the critics weren't impressed. They said my performances were uninspired. I was adding new songs like I'm Leavin' and Can't Help Falling in Love to my set, but it wasn't enough to keep the momentum going. The press started commenting on my weight, but the fans still loved me. In August, I received the Bing Crosby Award for Lifetime Achievement from the National Academy of Recording Arts and Sciences. It was a big deal, but it didn't change the fact that my record sales were lagging. My November tour was better than Vegas, but the singles It's Only Love and the Christmas album didn't chart at all. Tom Parker, my manager, was getting reports about my erratic behavior, and it was becoming a problem. As 1971 turned into 1972, my personal life was falling apart. Priscilla told me she was leaving, and it hit me hard. I was in pain, and it showed in the songs I chose. I added You Gave Me a Mountain to my set, a song that fit my mood. In February, I went to Las Vegas to record live performances for a new album. The band and I were trying to introduce new material, but the publishing companies weren't providing the songs I wanted. I was getting frustrated, and it was starting to affect my performances. The live recordings in Vegas were a mixed bag. I did some great performances, like An American Trilogy, which became a crowd favorite. But I was less engaged with the audience and the sessions were tough. Felton was sick, and I was feeling the pressure. We decided to finish the album in Knoxville during my April tour, hoping to find more material. RCA released Elvis Now, but it was mostly old material. My single, Until It's Time for You to Go, did poorly, and the album didn't do much better. The religious album and single He Touched Me were released for Easter, but the sales were still down. RCA wanted to release The First Time Ever I Saw Your Face and Help Me Make It Through the Night, but I pushed for An American Trilogy as my next single. I loved the song, and it became my second live single in April. The year 1972 was a tough one, but I was still trying to find my way through the pain and the challenges. I remember those recording sessions in March of 1972 at RCA Studio C in Hollywood like it was yesterday. The energy was electric, and everyone was buzzing with excitement. I was there playing bass, and I could feel Elvis's determination. He was back in the studio after a big fallout in Nashville the year before, and we all hoped this would be the comeback we needed. The first night, we started with Separate Ways, written by Red West and Richard Maynegra. It was a tough song, and we did 25 takes to get it right. Elvis was really into it, pushing himself and the band to the limit. The next day, we tackled Burning Love, a song from Dennis Lind. It was a real rocker, and everyone was convinced it would be a hit, but Elvis was skeptical. He didn't think it was a good rock song, and it took a lot of convincing from Felton, Joe, Jerry, and Red to get him to record it. Little did we know, it would become one of his biggest hits. Another standout was For the Good Times, written by Chris Christopherson. It was a beautiful ballad, and Elvis's voice was perfect for it. We also worked on Always on My Mind, which became a classic. The song was full of regret, and Elvis really connected with it. We worked late into the night, sometimes until 4 a.m., but it was worth it. Each song got our full attention, and we were all taking pride in what we were creating. After the recording sessions, we had a few days to rehearse for the upcoming tour. The nights were long, and we polished our set list, which included a mix of old favorites and new songs. One of the highlights was an American trilogy, a powerful medley that always brought the house down. We also rehearsed for the cameras as we were filming a sequel to That's the Way It Is called Standing Room Only. The tour started in Buffalo, and we hit several cities, including Hampton Roads, Richmond, Greensboro, and San Antonio. Each show was a mix of rock, country, and soul, with songs like Proud Mary, Never Been to Spain, and You Gave Me a Mountain. We even added some new gospel songs, like Amazing Grace, which always brought a spiritual moment to the show. But the biggest challenge was the upcoming shows at Madison Square Garden in New York City. It was a historic moment for Elvis, as he had never performed there before. He was nervous, and I could tell he was feeling the pressure. He even confided in Tom Jones, expressing doubts about the wisdom of playing at such a high-profile venue. But we all rallied around him, and he pushed through his anxiety. When we arrived in New York, the excitement was palpable. We set up a rehearsal space at the New York Hilton and worked on the set list, adding and refining songs. Elvis wanted everything to be perfect. The shows were packed, and the energy was incredible. We played 2 shows during the day and 2 at night, and each performance was a triumph. The audience was on their feet, and Elvis was in his element. The highlight of the shows was an American trilogy. When Elvis sang the final note, the crowd erupted. It was a moment we all knew would be remembered for a long time. The tour was a success, and it proved that Elvis still had what it took to captivate an audience. We all left New York feeling proud of what we had accomplished, and the recordings from those shows became some of the most beloved in Elvis's catalog. I remember it like it was yesterday. It was 1972, and I was about to do something no one had ever done before. I was going to perform at Madison Square Garden and record a live album in just 8 days. The Colonel, my manager, had this wild idea to prove that I could still bring in the crowds, even if my records weren't selling as well as they used to. Before the show, we had a press conference. The Colonel wanted to make sure the New York press, who used to be pretty mean to me back in the 1950s, would give me a fair shot. I told them that I wasn't going to do a rock and roll show, but instead, I would perform a mix of all kinds of music, just like I had been doing since 1970. I wasn't sure if anyone would come, but I had to believe they would. When the day of the show arrived, I was nervous. But as soon as I stepped onto that stage, all that worry disappeared. The place was packed with 80,000 people, and they were all there to see me. It was intense, but it felt amazing. I sang all my hit songs, from Love Me Tender to Suspicious Minds, and the crowd went wild. The energy was so strong that even I was surprised. The album, Elvis as recorded at Madison Square Garden, was a success, and it went gold in just a few weeks. After the shows, RCA, my record company, decided to release a single called Burning Love. It had a cool guitar part, and the radio stations started playing it. The song did really well, reaching number 3 on the charts and selling over 1 million copies. It felt like my career was back on track, but there was more to come. The Colonel had a new idea, a 1-hour show that would be broadcast live around the world from Hawaii. He wanted to make it even bigger than the Madison Square Garden event. We were going to do it in January, and it would be followed by another live album. I was a bit overweight at the time, but I went on a strict diet, exercised, and tanned to look my best. I also changed up my set list for the Hawaii show. I added some new songs like Fever and I'll Remember You, and I made sure to include Burning Love, because everyone expected to hear it. We did 2 shows in Hawaii, just in case anything went wrong during the live broadcast. The first show was on January 12th, and the second was on January 14th. Both shows were incredible, and the live album, Aloha From Hawaii, was a huge success. Looking back, those shows in 1972 and 1973 were some of the most important moments in my career. They showed that I could still connect with people, no matter how much time had passed. The Colonel and RCA knew how to make the most of these moments, and they helped me reach new heights. But it wasn't just about the money or the fame. It was about the music and the fans who loved it as much as I did. I remember the night of January 14th, 1973, like it was yesterday. The air was thick with excitement, and the lights of the Honolulu International Center were blinding. I was about to perform Aloha From Hawaii via satellite, a show that would be broadcast live to over 1 billion people around the world. It was a huge deal, but you wouldn't have known it by looking at me. I was focused, but there was a distant feeling, like I was watching myself from far away. The show was supposed to be live in the US, but they postponed it until April 4th to avoid clashing with the release of Elvis on tour. They added 5 more songs and some scenic footage to make it a 90-minute special. The extra songs were recorded late at night with no audience, and they didn't have the same energy as the live show. It was like trying to capture lightning in a bottle, but the bottle was already empty. The pressure was intense, but I didn't show it. I was all flash and flare, and the crowd loved it, but even as I sang, I felt a bit impatient. When someone shouted a request, I joked, "What? Okay, I'll do it." All 429 of them. Later, when we recorded the extra songs, I was exhausted and frustrated. I snapped at Glenn D. Harden for a mistake, saying, "Can't you follow a damn thing, Glenn? I swear to God, get with me somewhere in there." I was tired, and the medications weren't helping. The success of Aloha From Hawaii was a double-edged sword. The media buzz and the #1 album were a great statement of my power, but there were also signs that things weren't all right. The sparkle in my eyes and the joy in my movements were missing. I was a different person back then, and the world didn't know it. During the planning for the show, RCA learned that the Colonel and I might sell our rights to future royalties on all my past recordings. We needed the cash, especially for the divorce settlement. We sold the rights for $5,400,000, which seemed like a lot at the time. But in hindsight, it was a questionable move. My back catalog wasn't selling much by 1973, and my main income came from live shows. We needed the money, and RCA was happy to give it to us. The Colonel set up new music publishing companies, Elvis Music and Whitehaven Music, with Freddie Bienstock in charge. He wanted to keep everything secret and avoid outside interference. No recording sessions were allowed until the new companies were ready. After Aloha From Hawaii, RCA planned a new album. Joan Deary, who had supervised the Madison Square Garden and Aloha albums, suggested an album called Fool. She included live performances and some studio cuts. But when Felton Jarvis returned, he scrapped her idea and used studio recordings instead. The album, eventually titled Elvis, flopped. RCA was not happy. My health took a hit after the Hawaii show. I had laryngitis and missed several performances in Las Vegas. I was overweight, puffy, and my voice sounded weak. The tour in April and the engagement at the Sahara, Tahoe, were tough. A write-up in Variety said, "Elvis is neither looking or sounding good. Some 30 pounds overweight, he's puffy, white-faced and blinking against the light. The voice sounds weak. Delivery is flabby with occasional dynamic great effort and no enthusiasm." The final 10 days of the engagement were canceled. I flew home to Graceland on July 3rd, tired and stressed. A letter from RCA was waiting for me, setting out their expectations. They wanted more control over the recording process and demanded 24 new masters. I was supposed to record a pop album, 2 new singles, and a religious album. I was tired and worried about the divorce, but I had to push through. The most practical place to record was Stax Studios in Memphis. I started on July 20th, but no recordings were made that night. The next night, we worked on If You Don't Come Back and 3 Corn Patches. On July 22nd, we recorded Find Out What's Happening, I've Got a Thing About You Baby, and Just a Little Bit. The next night, we did Raised on Rock and For All Time's Sake. On July 24th, we recorded Girl of Mine, and on July 25th, we did Sweet Angeline. We also recorded backing tracks for Good, Bad, But Beautiful, Color My Rainbow, and The Wonders You Perform, but I never recorded the vocals for those songs. The sessions were long and tiring, but we got a lot done. The musicians were great, and the Stax studio was a creative force. We overdubbed Sweet Angeline at my Palm Springs home later that year. The Stamps, my backup singers, were there, and we added some final touches. That summer was a mix of highs and lows. I was still Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, but I was also a man dealing with personal and professional challenges. The music kept me going, and I knew I had to keep pushing forward, no matter what. The recording sessions at Stax were a mess. I showed up late in a cape with my karate teacher, Kang Ree, and I looked like I had been hit by a truck. My eyes were yellow, and my skin had that same color like I was a walking lemon. My old friends in the band, Bobby Wood, Reggie Young, and the others, were surprised by how different I looked and acted. I was out of shape, not the same guy who used to rock the house. I brought a bunch of singers with me, and the place was packed with guards checking name tags. It felt like a different world from the old days at American studios. The studio itself was a letdown. It wasn't set up for live recording, which is how I like to work. Everyone playing together on the spot, that's what made the music feel alive. But at Stax, the sound was all off. I couldn't hear myself or the band properly, and it was frustrating. We started with a bunch of songs, but nothing was clicking. I was tired, my voice was slurred, and I didn't have the energy or the interest. We barely got through a few takes, and even those were lackluster. I remember working on a song called If You Don't Come Back, and another called 3 Corn Patches, but they just didn't feel right. One of the few bright spots was a song called Take Good Care of Her. We managed to get a decent take, but even that felt like a struggle. I kept making jokes to keep the mood light, but inside I was worried. My voice didn't sound like it used to, and I could tell the band was disappointed. The technical issues didn't help. Al Pachuki, the engineer, was fighting with the Stax guys over the sound, and it was causing more problems. The next night I showed up late again, but I was a bit more into it. We worked on a song called Find Out What's Happening, and I felt more engaged. I was making jokes, teasing the band, and even flirting with the singers. It was fun, but the studio was still a headache. My microphone was stolen, and they replaced it with a cheap one that made me sound weird. I walked out, frustrated and fed up. The Colonel and the others tried to smooth things over, but it was clear that something was off. When I got to Las Vegas, I was under a lot of pressure. My health was slipping, and my divorce from Priscilla was getting messy. The press was starting to write about my personal life, and it was hard to ignore. I was supposed to record more songs for RCA, but I just wasn't feeling it. I did a few vocal overdubs at my house in Palm Springs, but it wasn't the same. I brought my new backup group, Voice, to help out, and we recorded a few songs, but it was a far cry from the magic of the old days. I tried to help my friend Tom Jones by introducing him to Voice, but he ended up keeping his own group. I was disappointed, but I signed Voice to my publishing company anyway. I wanted to support them, even if it wasn't the best business decision. My dad, Vernon, wasn't happy about it, but I didn't care. I just wanted to do what felt right. In the end, I recorded a handful of songs, but it wasn't enough for a full album. RCA was pushing me to do more, but I was burned out. The sessions were a reminder that things were changing, and I wasn't sure if I could keep up. The music was still in me, but the fire had dimmed. I knew I had to find a way to get it back, but for now I just needed a break.